Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're peeling back the layers on a case file that really details the absolute worst of American politics.
It's a world where, political ambition collides head-on with organized crime, personal vice.
And the messy pursuit of a single, highly flawed moral ideal. Our mission here is to analyze a stack of sources detailing a private investigation.
Right, an investigation into political corruption and blackmail,
Mm.
all centered on a really high-stakes U.S. Senate campaign.
We're synthesizing this material not just to follow the plot, but to uncover the true cost of that ambition, and maybe more surprisingly, the unwavering tenacity of personal loyalty.
It's a deep dive right into the intersection of power, raw vice, and the internal struggle to maintain a personal code in a world that's just defined by compromise.
And we begin this investigation far from, the gleaming halls of government.
Oh yeah, way far.
We start in a cramped, dimly lit office in Boston, overlooking the complex intersection of Berkeley and Boylston Streets.
And we meet our investigator, Spenser, settled in for what seems like a quiet evening, nursing a bottle of Murphy's Irish whiskey.
The sources tell us he's drawing energy from the silence, though he notes the city is rarely silent. You just hear the small, precise noises when the big ones disappear.
That opening image is pure atmosphere, isn't it? It establishes our guide immediately as a man who notices the nuance in the noise.
Mm-hmm.
He sees a couple down below, and his first instinct is to figure out if they're crossing the street in love, or if she's, lifting his wallet.
Right. It sets the tone for his constant, almost cynical observation. Everything's a calculation. Everything has a motive, and very little is what it appears to be.
And that quiet contemplation is just shattered by the arrival of Fix Farrell, or FX Farrell.
A bulky man whose fashion choices are as loud as his demeanor. He's wearing a Homburg, a light gray overcoat, and these really noticeable black velvet lapels.
He is the campaign's hired gun, representing the Meade-Alexander Campaign Committee.
And he's the quintessential political machine, all blunt force and low cunning.
Yeah. His client, Meade-Alexander, is a sitting congressman from Fitchburg, making a major jump into the Senate race.
So Farrell's here to discuss security. He immediately confirms they've received death threats, which he just dismisses almost immediately.
Right. Standard fare from left-wing crackpots, he says.
But then he drops the real intelligence, the piece that frames the entire investigation.
Alexander's opponent, Robert Brown, is heavily entrenched with the mob.
Farrell states it flatly. Been in the bag for years. He knows exactly where the rot is, even if he doesn't know the exact mechanism yet.
The irony is so rich. I mean, he's hiring a man of personal integrity to fight political corruption, even though Farrell himself embodies the very cynicism RPI despises.
Well, he is, as the sources note, a self-described resident fascist.
He believes in counting heads, arm twisting, and the absolute power of political capital. That's his world.
And when the PI questions him, how can you be sure Brown is compromised if you can't prove who bought him?
Farrell's response just sums up his entire political philosophy.
We're talking politics, asshole.
Yeah. He's saying that in this world, proof is irrelevant. The effective narrative is what matters.
And that's why Farrell is so critical to the whole setup. He forces the PI to recognize that his job isn't to uphold the law or even morality.
It's to protect a political position.
By any means necessary. And despite the PI admitting he has trouble with everybody's politics, the deal is struck.
He's hired as chief of security, entering a moral conflict from the very first handshake.
Okay, let's unpack the candidate. Meet Alexander, because he is a masterpiece of calculated presentation.
Oh, absolutely. When the PI first meets him, Alexander appears tall, tanned, and he projects this wholesome, almost rural image.
But you look closer, right? He's wearing an expensive dark blue three-piece suit and these black boots that close with a zipper up the side.
It's the perfect blend. Populist appeal and serious tailored wealth.
It's the visual definition of that late 70s, early 80s Christian conservative packaging. The man of faith who is also commercially successful and politically serious.
And Alexander immediately tries to assert his moral dominance over the hired help. The very first question he asks the PI is,
"Are you a religious man, Mr. Spenser?"
And the PI, true to form, gives him the straight answer. He's an agnostic, raised Catholic, but no longer believing.
Alexander just takes this in stride, unfazed.
Because for Alexander, the PI doesn't need to share the faith, he just needs to respect its power.
Right. Alexander explicitly states his candidacy is driven by a Christian imperative, a calling to redeem a desolate country.
He says he runs in the service of Christ, to implement clear imperatives. He believes his political actions are divine mandates.
This high-minded rhetoric is so intense, so absolute, that Fix Farrell has to step in and try to ground him.
Yeah, Farrell just cuts him off. He says, okay, Meade, cut the shit. We ain't hiring him to pray for you.
And then he reminds him, critically, to watch his language in front of his wife, Ronnie.
And that's our first sign. The first hint that Alexander's moral armor has some gaps that Fix Farrell, the pragmatist, sees very clearly.
Which brings us to Ronnie Alexander. She is presented as the absolute perfect campaign spouse.
At 46, she looks 20 years younger than her 51-year-old husband. She's got that classic, carefully maintained look, long blonde hair styled Farrah Fawcett.
Large blue eyes, and she wears this rather old-fashioned cameo brooch on a black velvet ribbon.
The PI immediately picks up on her performative perfection. When she serves coffee, he's thinking to himself that she probably dots her I with a little heart.
She smiles brilliantly, says she'll feel much better with him aboard. She is the picture of supportive, wifely adoration.
But Farrell's need to police Alexander's language in front of her suggests that her calm demeanor is really vulnerable. The facade is already cracking.
The structure of the security team gets established pretty quickly. The PI is put in charge over 2 Fitchburg cops.
Dale Frazier, who handles logistics and crowd control, and Tom Campbell, the close bodyguard.
And this gives the PI immediate operational control and, more importantly, distance from local law enforcement.
Which will prove crucial when he has to, act outside the law later on.
We get the full force of Alexander's political platform through his speech at the University of Lowell. And this isn't just standard conservatism.
No, it's a moral declaration of war. He defines these crisis points with statistics designed to shock.
It's the rhetoric of moral panic, targeted precisely at his conservative base.
He highlights that nearly half of all marriages end in divorce, and the very specific and telling detail for the time, nearly 80% of videocassettes sold are pornographic.
This is a deliberate attack on the culture. He equates abortion with the slaughter of unborn children.
And he argues that the sacred web of the family is under attack from everything.
Feminism, children's rights, drug pushers, intrusive government, those who urge homosexual marriage.
His goal is nothing less than a crusade to find America reborn, united under God, standing firm against godless communism.
The PI observes that most of the audience offers heartfelt applause. They are completely buying the crusade.
But the journalists traveling with Alexander, they close their notebooks and head for the exits the moment he says America reborn.
Which signals that the established media just views this as extremist theater, not serious policy.
It reinforces this idea that Alexander is running 2 campaigns, one for the faithful and one for the necessary compromise of politics.
So the moment Alexander leaves the protected environment of the auditorium, the contrast between his idealized crusade and the messy reality of the campaign trail becomes immediate.
Oh yeah, pronounced. Outside the University of Lowell, the pickets are numerous, representing every group Alexander who just condemned.
Gay Liberation, NOW, the NAACP, Planned Parenthood.
It's a physical manifestation of the divisions he's exploiting. And the sources show that Alexander really struggles to deal with unvarnished public interaction.
Especially when it exposes the dark undercurrents of his own base.
This comes to a head during a stop with the Haverhill Republican Women's Club. A small, seemingly harmless woman asks a question that reveals this explicit racial prejudice.
She asks what Alexander will do about the darks.
A critical moment of exposure for him. He can't afford to endorse the racial slur in front of the press, but he also can't alienate this key demographic. So what does he do?
He performs a classic politician's pivot. He dodges the specific racist question entirely and shifts the conversation to the government's role in education.
It's a demonstration of his pragmatic hypocrisy. The man running a moral crusade against the desolate country can't address explicit hatred when it comes from his own supporters.
And this is exactly the kind of moral compromise the PI is wired to observe.
So the campaign continues. Through Haverhill and a Raytheon plant in Andover, the environment is high pressure, and we start seeing the mounting stress reveal itself in Ronnie Alexander.
At the Raytheon plant, the crowd reaction to her is entirely physical. The PI notes a bearded worker looks directly at her and just flatly states, "Nice ass."
That detail is so telling. She's being sexualized by the very people her husband claims to champion, and Alexander is completely oblivious, just wrapped up in his rhetoric.
And this unwelcome attention, combined with the stress of maintaining that perfect image, seems to be driving her towards self-medication.
Absolutely. The PI's observations about Ronnie's drinking become more and more important.
At a reception for the Christian Action Coalition, a very conservative crowd, men in suits, women in dresses, Ronnie is seen finishing her jug wine and heading for a refill.
And the campaign team is clearly aware of this problem. Fix Farrell immediately whispers, with genuine alarm, "Ronnie's started on the wine."
This triggers a rapid response. The team has to engineer a quick exit.
But Ronnie grabs her plastic cup, taking one for the road as they rush her out.
It's devastating. The wife, who is meant to be the living proof of the sacred web, is an active alcoholic whose condition is known and actively covered up by the campaign's dirty tricks man.
And later in Boston, the PI notices the situation has escalated. She's drinking Jack Daniels on the rocks, and a waiter notes she's slurring her words.
She fights with Alexander over ordering wine, telling him dinner without wine is like a kiss without a squeeze. The stress is just boiling over, manifesting through alcohol dependence.
This intense personal pressure cooker is the backdrop for the first physical threat. The campaign moves to Springfield.
And two college volunteers, John Taylor and Melanie Walsh, both self-described born-again Christians from AIC, are harassed at the Civic Center.
This incident is the catalyst. Two older men, later identified as Pat Ricci and Sal Pelletier, they knock down their flyers, they strike John, and they call Melanie a derogatory name.
When the kids report this, the PI recognizes immediately that this isn't random. This is a professional message.
And here we see the PI's method in action. He immediately bypasses formal police channels, framing the pursuit of the thugs as an intelligence operation.
Why go himself? Because the police would complicate the issue, require warrants, and possibly leak the connection to Alexander's opponent.
He needs quick, actionable intelligence.
So he finds the thugs, Ricci and Pelletier, and uses his signature move. He exhausts them in Forest Park until they're too winded to properly defend themselves.
And he hits Pelletier with a modified version of the left hook, ensuring a swift and decisive end to the confrontation.
The result is immediate. He forces a confession without any legal entanglements. They were paid.
And he uses the threat of future physical violence to ensure they will never bother Alexander's people again. This is pure, self-regulated justice.
Driven by a deep moral outrage that they were slapping a couple of kids around?
It perfectly illustrates the PI's paradox. He breaks the law, he commits assault, he uses violence, but he does it in immediate service of a moral good protecting innocent volunteers.
It establishes him as someone willing to step into the ugly, messy world that Alexander, the man of God, only lectures about.
The successful handling of the thugs really pushes the investigation forward. Alexander recognizes the PI's competence and schedules a private dinner with him.
At the Student Prince in the Fort in Springfield. And this is where the core truth finally comes out.
The setting just underscores Alexander's distress. It's supposed to be this convivial meal, but Alexander's so tense he orders a beer but never touches his sauerbraten.
He spends an agonizing amount of time just debating whether he can trust the PI.
The PI, showing remarkable impatience for a PI, cuts through the preamble. He says, "The foreplay is getting tiresome."
That forces Alexander to reveal the pressure. I'm being blackmailed.
They want him to drop out of the Senate race and throw his support and his substantial conservative base to his opponent, Robert Brown.
And this instantly validates Fix Farrell's initial intelligence. Brown is indeed corrupted, and the mob has an active investment in him winning.
The harassment of the volunteers was just a warning shot to soften Alexander up before the real leverage was deployed.
And the leverage it's devastating. Alexander finally breaks down, confessing through tears.
It's Mrs. Alexander. She has, I'm afraid, been indiscreet.
The blackmail consists of pictures, specifically a color videotape in VHS format, which was mailed directly to their home in Fitchburg.
And the content is Ronnie having sex with a young man in an apartment. Alexander's belief system immediately constructs this narrative of victimhood.
Right, stressing that Ronnie was apparently unaware she was being taped.
This framing is crucial for Alexander because it allows him to continue protecting her without dealing with her profound unhappiness or desperation.
We have to pause here because this is the absolute core moral inversion of the entire case.
It really is. Alexander, the man whose campaign is based on absolute, divinely mandated imperatives, restoring the sacred web, fighting communism, upholding Christian values.
Now reveals his absolute priority.
Exactly. His commitment to his wife supersedes his commitment to his God-driven crusade.
He states, in this dramatic moment out in the rain, that Ronnie must never know he knows about the tape.
And the line that just defines his moral choice, "I would support Satan to spare her."
Wow. He is willing to commit what he considers the ultimate political and spiritual betrayal, enabling a mob-connected candidate just to protect the reputation and emotional well-being of his wife.
This is such a high-impact nugget of insight. It challenges the very concept of a public moral code.
Alexander's public life is defined by these absolute spiritual ideals, but his private life is governed by a singular secular loyalty, his love for Ronnie.
And the PI recognizes that the political machine is secondary to Alexander's desperate personal need to keep his world intact. For Alexander, Ronnie's emotional safety is his only absolute.
So, with the motivation established, the PI can now focus on the mechanism of the blackmail. He returns to Boston to investigate Robert Brown.
And he starts with his longtime contact, the Boston Globe reporter Wayne Cosgrove.
Cosgrove confirms the political analysis. Brown is a traditional liberal, but the state is trending conservative, giving Alexander a real chance.
Right, because as Cosgrove notes, liberalism is bankrupt in the minds of many voters at the time.
Cosgrove provides the necessary political context. He describes Alexander as politically toxic disaster due to his fundamentalist convictions.
But also notes that Alexander is so honest he makes your teeth hurt.
This reinforces the idea that Alexander's public character is genuinely moral, even if his politics are extreme.
Cosgrove also confirms Fix Farrell's reputation as the cynical, resident fascist who knows how to spot a winner.
The breakthrough comes from Cosgrove's old news clips. The PI finds a picture of Robert Brown at a 1978 fundraiser shaking hands.
And standing nearby is Vinnie Morris, Joe Bros's longtime executive assistant.
Vinnie Morris is not an amateur. He is Bros's instrument, his trusted go-between.
Citing Morris with Brown confirms that the political machine, which Farrell originally alleged, is real and has a direct connection to the state's organized crime hierarchy, headed by Joe Bros.
So the PI now has the top connection. The next step is confirming the bottom who were the thugs working for.
He visits Boston police detective Martin Quirk to access intelligence files on Joe Bros. He uses Quirk to formally identify the two men he had previously assaulted, Pat Ricci and Sal Pelletier.
This is a classic PI move. He uses the system for information while operating outside of it for action.
And having the official names, the PI goes back and confronts Pelletier again, forcing him, under greater implied threat, to name the man who hired them.
That man is Louis Nolan.
The PI locates Nolan in Springfield. And this is where the PI's ability to use verbal tactics really comes into play.
He successfully impersonates a representative of Vinnie Morris, using the language of the organization and the implied threat of Brez's displeasure.
Nolan, terrified, just sweats profusely and confirms everything. He reveals Brez's organization, through Vinnie, was behind the political harassment.
But Nolan thought the message was just to shake him up a little, letting Alexander know we mean business.
He confirms the mob organization is involved, but Nolan still doesn't know about the videotapes, which means the tape operation is highly compartmentalized.
The PI realizes he has to see the source material. He travels to Alexander's Washington home in Georgetown.
A 3-story yellow frame house.
Oh.
Alexander hands him the key and leaves him alone in the den to view the color VHS tape.
And the viewing of the tape provides the final devastating clues.
Ronnie is seen drunk, humming Night Train, and dancing awkwardly before stripping down to a garter belt.
The PI, observing the scene with this clinical detachment, notes that her sexual activity with the young man is described as expert, indicating experience, which really contradicts Alexander's image of her fragility.
Crucially, the PI notes the young man wears sunglasses the entire time and carefully faces Ronnie toward the camera, confirming she was taped without her complete knowledge or consent. She was a planned target.
But the truly critical clues are environmental. The PI notices the room is brightly lit, confirming a Western exposure.
And on a desk, barely visible, is a beer mug with a college or fraternity emblem.
The PI uses a magnifying glass to identify the crest as Ashoya's Georgetown University's crest.
The deducted jump is instantaneous and brilliant.
Yeah.
Georgetown is the location. The local mob boss is Joe Bros.
A quick phone call back to Belson at the Boston Police confirms that Joe Bros's eldest son, Gerald Joseph Bros, Jerry 22, is a political science senior at Georgetown.
The blackmailer isn't an outside contractor, is the boss's amateur yet deeply embedded son.
Wow. And the discovery that the blackmailer is Jerry Bros, operating right out of D.C., turns the case from a political problem into a family crisis for the mob.
The PI immediately travels to Jerry Bros's 3-story apartment on M Street near Key Bridge.
To confirm the setup, he commits a serious crime, breaking and entering. He overcomes a specialized security lock by climbing the balcony,
confirming his willingness to operate completely outside the law to achieve his objective. Once inside, he confirms the elaborate taping setup.
A large mirror in the bedroom is backed by a one-way mirror in the adjacent bathroom, providing a perfect, concealed vantage point for filming.
The physical evidence matches the tape perfectly. The PI concludes this was a purposeful operation, not some casual affair. Ronnie was targeted.
Tailing Jerry Brose reveals a pattern that quickly confirms the nature of the blackmail. Routine class and library visits are interspersed with frequent meetings.
With young teenage girls and older middle-aged women, the PI correctly deduces a vice trade linked to the videotaping.
To confirm the operation, the PI uses highly aggressive and legally questionable tactics.
He targets a 16-year-old high school girl named Linda Remmert, who was leaving Jerry's apartment drunk.
He uses the threat of police action, impersonating an officer and confiscating a small packet of cocaine he finds in her purse to force her to talk.
This is the PI at his most morally compromised, but also his most effective. He is leveraging his authority and breaking several laws to protect his client's wife.
And Linda reveals the nature of Jerry's drug-for-sex trade. Jerry deals coke, and if clients don't have money, he trades for sex.
She also confirms the existence of the grotesque core of the operation. Granny parties.
Gatherings of grown-ups, middle-aged women who participate in or watch group sex, often using that one-way mirror in the bathroom as a way to peek.
This detail is pivotal. It links Ronnie Alexander's seemingly isolated indiscretion to a much larger institutionalized network of vice and exploitation run by Jerry.
Ronnie wasn't just having an affair. She was caught in a drug-fueled porn ring run by a powerful mobster's son trying to impress his father.
This is the deep societal rot that Alexander rails against in his speeches, ironically revealed through his wife's desperate behavior.
The PI decides he needs ironclad evidence, not just for the blackmail, but as leverage against Joe Brose.
So he convinces Linda to help him gain access to one of these parties. He attends using the vantage point of the one-way mirror to photograph a group sex session.
4 college boys and 2 women in their early 40s, and he makes sure he gets at least one full-face shot of all participants.
He immediately uses this leverage. He confronts one of the participants, Cynthia Knox, the wife of a Department of Transportation bureaucrat.
And Cynthia reveals the sad reality of the grannies. She and her friend were recruited because Jerry supplied cocaine to their husbands, and they were desperate for a supply.
Cynthia describes the humiliation of being called a granny and the feeling of being passed around. This is the reality of D.C. society beneath the political surface.
The very hypocrisy and moral decay Alexander preaches about, now exposed and documented by the PI.
With overwhelming evidence against Jerry, the PI is summoned by Congressman Brown.
He's met by 2 computer salesmen, thugs who look like preppy tennis club doubles players, and taken to Brown's office in the Cannon office building.
Brown attempts to stonewall and threaten the PI with his political clout and Joe Brose's pressure.
But the PI, always calculating, sees the weakness immediately. He calls Brown out on the amateur nature of his security detail.
The PI's strategic insight here is just brilliant. He says, if Joe knew, then Jerry would have gone to him, not you. And some people that might be able to do damage would have showed up, not those 2 computer salesmen you sent.
That line proves everything. Brown's visible fear confirms the PI's suspicion.
Brown was either working directly with Jerry or covering for him, trying to protect his political investment. But Joe Brose was entirely unaware of his son's direct, foolish involvement in the blackmail scheme.
This amateur complexity explains why the blackmail was handled so poorly and why the PI could trace it so easily.
It wasn't the work of a seasoned mob boss. It was the work of a spoiled, ambitious son.
So, armed with the knowledge that Jerry the son is the weak link, the PI returns to Boston to report directly to the boss, Joe Brose.
Brose is older now, white-haired, and appears physically smaller. But the PI notes with chilling clarity that his eyes are still without humanity.
Vinnie Morris, the executive assistant, is also present.
The PI lays out the entire case, point by point. Jerry is running a solo operation: coke, porn, sex, blackmail, specifically to impress his father.
And he successfully exploited Brose's organizational structure through Vinnie, who was trying to clean it up before Brose found out the extent of the disaster.
Brose's reaction is cold, paternal, and entirely pragmatic. He is angry, but not necessarily at the moral aspect of the porn or the blackmail.
Right. His rage is directed at Jerry's stupidity for risking Brose's substantial investment in Brown.
He expresses a detached love, stating, "I love him. He should settle for that." He dismisses the dirty movies, but focuses entirely on the threat to his business.
Vinnie Morris admits he knew and tried to cover for the son to protect Brose from the bad news, only to have the PI expose the entire mess.
And this is where Braz makes his fatal choice. He chooses the PI's death over the risk of his son's exposure.
Despite the PI solving Braz's problem, identifying the amateur threat, Braz cannot risk the PI revealing the full extent of Jerry's operation.
That could attract unwanted federal scrutiny to the Braz organization. So Braz chooses to kill the PI to protect his son's future potential, even if that son is a fool.
This leads to the brutal, immediate betrayal. Ed DiBernardi and Roger Francona ambush the PI while he is jogging on the Charles River Esplanade.
Right under the Mass Ave Bridge.
But the PI is always prepared. He's carrying a small .25 automatic, which he immediately uses to return fire.
He kills both men, but not before taking a through-and-through shot to the thigh.
The sources detail the subsequent frantic survivalist sequence. The PI uses DiBernardi's belt to tourniquet the wound and manages to crash DiBernardi's Buick into a fence near Storrow Drive, eventually passing out.
The severity of the violence here really underscores the cost of engaging with this world. The PI committed a violent act of self-defense, killing 2 men, all in service of a client he fundamentally finds contemptible.
When the PI wakes up in the hospital, Boston Police Detective Martin Quirk is standing over him.
Quirk confirms that he's been monitoring the PI's well-being. And this is where the PI receives his greatest piece of leverage yet, not from the mob, but from the institution he often avoids.
Quirk tells the PI that he will communicate directly to Joe Braz that if the PI dies, Quirk will make a mess of his life.
He's essentially promising to unleash the full force of the organized crime unit on Braz if anything happens to the PI.
Braz is a practical man. Sustained, focused investigation by dedicated police units is the one thing that can genuinely dismantle his operation.
The PI now has the perfect combination of leverage, detailed evidence of Jerry's crimes, and institutional protection.
The final negotiation is set. The PI meets Braz and Vinny at the footbridge in the public garden,
Hobbling on a blackthorn walking stick, accompanied by his longtime ally, Hawk, who carries a short, double-barreled shotgun.
The PI leverages the threat from Quirk, emphasizing that his contingency plans mean the evidence against Jerry will go public if the PI is killed.
But he seals the deal with pure political cynicism, which is the only language Braz truly understands.
The PI convinces Braz that Alexander is a political joke who won't win the Senate race anyway, regardless of the blackmail.
Braz would lose nothing by dealing, and he would protect his son and his existing investment, Brown, from catastrophic exposure.
Braz agrees to the deal, not because the PI has a stronger moral standing, but because the PI has a more practical approach.
Braz says that he accepts the deal, not because of the PI squeeze, but because my kid was wrong.
It's an organizational principle. A bad decision must be corrected. He orders Vinny to retrieve the tape and destroy the operation.
The political machine rights itself, having outsourced its dirty work to the PI.
We shift now from that external battlefield of mobsters and politicians to the PI's internal landscape where the stakes are arguably higher.
Throughout the sources, the PI's internal monologue reveals his struggle to reconcile his self-made moral compass with the cynical world he navigates.
He defines his entire existence by effort, by self-creation, and by an absolute love for Susan.
His life is built brick at a time on a rigorous personal code of honor, commitment, absolute fidelity. He needs to believe in romantic love and honor to justify the ugly world he operates in.
But the threat to the self-made structure comes from his longtime partner, Susan Silverman.
She's a Harvard PhD in psychology, currently doing a pre-doctoral internship in D.C., and she's exploring her identity, finding herself without the PI.
An effort he finds jarringly out of sync with their established relationship.
Her rationale is deeply personal and professionally informed. She explains that she was always defined through men. Her father, her husband, and now the PI.
In D.C., she feels she can finally be defined only by her work. She says, "Here I am what I am, I miss you, but missing you is a price I have to pay in order to become completely me."
This quest for autonomy, this prioritizing of self-definition, is profoundly threatening to the PI because he feels it compromises the absolute nature of their love.
He fears she's becoming shrinky, adopting the jargon, prioritizing institutional demands like choosing to spend Thanksgiving with her program supervisor.
And accepting events like cocktail parties to boost morale. He confronts her, saying she's committed herself to the very institutional, jargon-laden world he worked so hard to remain free of.
This leads to a fascinating philosophical debate that is so central to the PI's struggle.
Susan posits a deeply pragmatic, almost Hobbesian view of human motivation. all behavior is self-serving.
She argues that even heroic acts like running into a burning building to save a child are done because the person couldn't live with herself otherwise.
Therefore, categories like heroes and villains are not truly applicable.
For the PI, who operates on a black and white moral code, this is destructive cynicism. He needs to believe that honor and heroism exist as independent concepts, not just as self-serving psychological mechanisms. He calls her analysis bullshit.
The tension here is that the PI needs Susan to be his moral anchor, the proof that absolute, unwavering loyalty is possible. As she points out, he loves her because as long as you do, you can believe in romantic love.
He worries. He thinks, I always assumed that someone who found his or her identity the way you're finding yours was shallow.
If she, his absolute, is willing to compromise or change, then his entire self-made structure of integrity might be baseless.
The deepest insight into the PI's internal struggle comes from Paul Giacomin, the PI's surrogate son figure and dancer.
Paul, who observes the PI with his clinical clarity, recognizes that the PI is struggling because he has let Susan inside, compromising his former invulnerable integrity.
Paul argues that the PI is trapped by his own myth. The PI has spent his life making himself a man of honor, commitment, absolute fidelity. Now, that myth is being tested by the person who validates it.
And Paul's observation is penetrating. If his deepest instinct, his choice of Susan, is wrong, then his entire self-made structure might be wrong. Paul notes, the tightness of myself is no longer enough.
So the PI is forced to confront the ultimate choice. Compromise his code to keep Susan close, or maintain his code and accept her distance and her change.
And, in the end, he chooses his code.
He accepts Susan's path, concluding that his love is absolute and cannot be compromised, existing for his sake independently of her physical presence or emotional state.
He decides that this absolute love can exist even if she is remote or changed, dead or alive. It could exist without you.
His self-made man status, built brick by brick through violence and effort, is too fundamental to discard, even if it brings him profound pain.
Our deep dive concludes with the political crisis neatly resolved. The blackmail tape is destroyed, Ronnie Alexander is protected, and the Senate race proceeds normally.
Meade Alexander, having escaped scandal, returns to Fitchburg, prepared to continue his self-proclaimed moral crusade.
But the sources leave us with a sense of lingering despair. The underlying rot, the social sickness that leads sophisticated D.C. housewives to participate in the desperate, drug-fueled granny parties, remains untouched.
And Alexander continues his insane mission of protection, willfully blind to the source of his wife's desperation and unhappiness.
His public crusade is saved, but his private reality is a lie.
The irony is powerful. Alexander's absolute moral goal, protecting his wife's image, was achieved, but only because the PI secured that outcome by wading into the moral sewer.
Committing assault, breaking and entering, impersonating an officer, and killing 2 men. He deployed violence and deceit in the service of saving a moral image.
And this brings us back to the investigator's core conflict. He spent the entire dive operating outside of moral convention, yet he did so to maintain an intensely personal, absolute code of loyalty and honor that even his most loved partner questions.
He risked everything, not for Alexander's political ideals, but for his own internal ideal of what love and commitment must be.
It leaves us with this provocative thought that connects the political world of Meade Alexander to the personal world of the PI. When pursuing an absolute moral goal, does the integrity of the method still matter?
Or is the highest price for maintaining a personal ideal not the violence or the deceit, but the ultimate acceptance of distance and change from the person you love, just so your absolute commitment can remain intact for your own sake?
Something for you to mull over as you navigate your own messy world.